Hi, Mitch here. This is another video of my tutorial series about the development of my Sonic Lifeforms album, an interactive procedural music album that I released on the App Store for iOS devices, and it's done completely in the Unreal Engine using MetaSounds and Blueprints. And I've got some other videos where I'm showing how I'm working with the blueprints and the MetaSounds, but today this video is about the musical elements that I'm preparing for the use in the Unreal Engine. And that will be the topic for today. Just going through some of the musical building blocks and how I'm preparing them, what kind of material I'm using here, and my thoughts about what kind of musical material I want to have in there. Okay, let's jump right in. And one thing that's interesting that I wanted to show you is while all the tracks have the same tempo with 70 BPM, the bar lengths are pretty different for most of the loops. There's only the drums and the kick drum here and Indian style percussion with sitar here. They have the same loop length, but almost all other stems have different bar lengths. And that's an interesting thing. When you're looping them, there will be like timing shifts, and there will always be new constellations when they are looping against each other. Like 60 bars here for the vocal stem, and 52 bars for this drone synth here, and 56 bars for the Indian percussion, and so on and so on. There's only the drum loop with a kick drum here that is synchronized in terms of bar lengths, and the Indian percussion loop and the sitar, but everything else is looping at a different duration, and that gives interesting timing shifts if they are constantly looping. And so this is another level of complexity, which is very important for procedural music, that you are dealing with the level of complexity, that you are balancing how complex things get, that they are not getting too complex, but complex enough so that it's never boring, that it's always a new constellation that is happening in the music. So this is something you have to take into account when you're composing, actually. So if you're thinking of harmony changes, then you have to be very aware which harmony changes go together, even if they're out of sync. And when you have to choose the same bar lengths for tracks that are playing together. So let's just have a listen. So the whole thing here is in D minor, and let's start with drums and percussion. So the first thing that I have here is a pretty long stem for the drums, which is that long because there's a lot of variation in here. The reason for that is that the drums are going to be a backbone of the whole arrangement, and therefore the randomizers and the weighting of the randomizers will be set so that the drums are present quite often, not all of the time. And don't forget, there will be additional filtering, and there are envelopes fading in and fading out and stuff like that. But bottom line is drums will be an important arrangement part, and so there has to be a lot of variation in the programming itself. So the variation will not come from only the filtering and the randomizers. There has to be a lot of musical content inside of the drums. So let's listen to that. And you hear that there are already some small fills here and there. Some effects are already bounced into that track with some delays. And of course, it's important to have some stability. So right here, the basic groove is quite stable, but you see the little things that appear from time to time, like the gong here, or the little glitches and the little stutters. And after a while, it evolves to another groove. Yeah, and the little additional effect sounds here. And when you think of it, when it is being played back by the app, it's just like think of it as a spotlight that is shining on the track and then fading away. So sometimes it will be faded in, and then you're gonna hear what's in this musical building block, and then it's going to be faded out or filtered away or just played back with a lot of delay and reverb. So it's going to be one of the main elements of the arrangement, and therefore it has to be stable, but also with a lot of variation at the same time. And the little variations that are not taking away the stability. And another level of complexity that I wanted to introduce was that I split the bass drum, the one with the energy in it, from the rest of the drum track here. So these are meant to go together. These are meant to be basically one drum performance here. But what will be possible for the app will be that only one of them remains in a situation. So like if the app decides to fade away the main drums, there's still a chance that the kick drum is still there, which keeps the groove going, but in a different variation. Or the other way around, when the drums are still there and the power of the kick drum is faded out, and so you have another variation with the drums that are not that powerful but still holding the groove. Or they're going together. And then don't forget, there's always the chance that, let's say, if the kick drum is still playing and the rest of the drums is not, that there might be some delay effect in the app, and the kick drums are going to sound like, which is a new musical situation again. And this is just the two tracks, drums and kick drum. So let's see what else we got here. A low drone here, which was actually, I think, the first element that I made for this track, which was like giving me the mood and giving me the basic idea. And again, quite similar to what I did with the drums and the kick drum here, I introduced a second low frequency element here. Play it on its own. This one doesn't have that much energy in the low frequency range, but it introduces some additional movement, and when they're being played together, there are some new patterns here. And again, you see these two do not have the same bar length, so if I'm continuing to loop that against each other, there will always be some slight variations here just because the loops are not in sync. But they will always go together because there are not many harmony changes going on here. So, but I'm always testing that out when I'm composing, that every constellation, however they loop against each other, they will go together in terms of harmony and melody, which can sometimes be a little bit tricky and you have to experiment, but at the end of the day it's okay. You always get to a point where you say, okay, these two go together. This part here, I called it a Rhodes, but it's a heavily processed Rhodes sound. That one here goes together with a low drone, and that's also for some harmony changes here, and therefore they have to have the same bar length, because in other constellations that would be problematic in terms of harmonies and some notes that wouldn't go together. So these two are meant to be played in sync. And again, the randomizer will fade those two against each other, and sometimes it's gonna be just like and another very important thing is that there are a lot of dynamics in the tracks, so you have to be aware that silence is a very important part of composition, or some breaks in between, some space to breathe. Now the drone, I'm fading in the drone. I'm doing that on the other screen, the fading. And then the third one, this just gives a little bit of variation and a different flavor. But these three together are already an ambient track that could go on, and there will always be new situations, and depending on how they are filtered, how they are looping against each other. Okay. So let's listen to some other stuff. Here, this is just an element that I introduced because I wanted to have the possibility for some stability, actually. This is just very simple percussion groove. It gives me the eighth note feeling, holds everything together. And I keep these things in mind, so I know why I introduced those elements to the arrangement when I'm balancing the settings in my randomizer. So I'm keeping that in mind, and I know, okay, this is just a 4-bar loop, and so the randomizer settings must allow that this 4-bar loop is kept alive for some time, because it's meant for introducing stability, and if it's just there for like 4 bars or 6 bars and then immediately fade it out, then it won't give me stability. So this needs to remain in the arrangement for a certain amount of time, and that's how I'm setting the randomizer duration times and the probabilities in a way so that once it's faded in, it should stay there for at least, like, say 32 bars or 64 bars. It may be filtered, some delay or reverb on it, just to give you some additional variation, but still a basic percussion element that needs to stay there for a little while and do its job. Very different here with the Indian groove and the accompanying sitar sound like. Let's have a listen. This is similar to the drums. This is a longer segment here, and the little variations are already in the programming of these 2 tracks here. Yeah, you see the little things that the sitar does, some fills with the groove. So the variations and the complexity are already built into these tracks here. Then I always have some element that gives me some musical content that really which humanizes the whole thing. So something that I actually played and that is not programmed stuff. So like this keyboard track here with the Fender Rhodes. And most of the times I'm using some modal harmony changes here because they give me enough excitement and enough variation in terms of musical content, but they will always go together with like the low drone, for instance here. And then some additional strings, which are too loud. And again, the bar lengths are different here, so every time it loops there will be a new constellation of what parts of the strings go together with what parts of the keyboards and the other elements. And then what I also like to do is introduce some elements that just bring some dynamic, some excitement to the whole arrangement. In this track, I had the idea of introducing some orchestral brass, which is, well, not the first thing that comes to mind if you're doing a track with a lot of Indian and Asian musical elements here. But somehow I thought this would be an element that could bring some additional excitement. So let's have a listen what that sounds like. Which makes it sound a little bit more like a film score or something like that, I guess. And again, these are looping at a different length here, and there will always be some timing shifts when you compare it to the other elements. And I'm always double checking, do they all go together in terms of melodies? Trying out before I import them to the Unreal Engine and setting all the parameters in the blueprints, I'm always trying in the DAW several combinations that give me some idea how it could sound like. But at the end of the day, it's still a very exciting moment to actually feed all those elements to the blueprints, to the MetaSounds, and then listening back to it in the app for the first time and see what actually becomes out of those elements, and then fine tweaking all the parameters so that the whole thing is a really balanced thing, so that it's not like too chaotic or too minimalistic or and sometimes I have to go back to the DAW and change some of the musical elements. But the elements I'm having here already actually was using for Sonic Lifeforms. So don't worry if you play everything simultaneously at the same time. It's going to be much too crowded, and that's okay, because that's never going to happen in the app, that everything is playing at the same time. But let's do it just really quickly. And let's quickly go through some of the elements that are there. The vocal track here is also a longer track with some silence in between, and lots of variation already printed into the stem here. All the effects already there. Stuff like that. Already a lot of different situations here. Okay, and don't forget that this is not going to be played in sequence when we are using this element in the app itself. So sometimes the spotlight will just highlight this little part and then fade away, and then 50 seconds later it will highlight the silence. Take that into account too when you're setting the probabilities that could happen here, but that's the plan. And the next time we'll have some focus on this track will be like just this little part here. And that's exactly what I wanted, because the complexity that this causes here is something that our pattern recognition in our brain will never ever recognize as a pattern that can be reproduced by the listener. So it's like this is the organic part where our brain says, okay, there's no pattern for me, although there is, but it's too complex. And that's the reason why it's always going to be like, okay, this sounds like an organic form for the listener. And that's actually what I really wanted to achieve with this vocal track here, so that there's so much variation that you can't recognize a pattern here. Very different from, this percussion pattern. There, it's very important that you recognize a pattern when it comes to the arrangement. Okay, let's quickly step to the other part here. I've got this high frequency arpeggio. This is both an element of variation, because little changes in sound of the arpeggio are there, But on the other hand, it's an arpeggio and then gives me some orientation and some stability. Another element that I'm using only very softly in the final track is but yeah, it gives me some more musical elements. It will be audible in the app, in the track, only every now and then. Maybe sometimes you're listening back to the track and you're not hearing that element at all. But that's also a cool thing, because when you're coming back to the app some other day, and then you say, okay, I haven't heard that before. I've been listening to the tracks 3 times and there's still a new element there. This is a cool thing because that gives you the impression of the track reinventing itself every time you're playing it. Then we have some little impact here. This is some I like to call it some additional flavoring. The same with this element here. This will only be audible every now and then, sometimes not at all. Or when I played with the acoustic guitar here. But you know, this is the fun part. You get all the basic stuff ready, and then you're flavoring the whole thing with these tiny elements that give the arrangement a little certain something. Okay, so yeah, this was a quick walkthrough through the musical elements that I'm using. I hope it brought some insight to how I'm working with the musical building blocks that I'm using for my procedural music systems. Thank you for watching and listening, and see you next time. Bye bye.
Hara Hara Shankara.